Awesome.
Yeah.
So, hey everybody, and welcome to, I have no idea what we're going to call this, talking about role-playing games that we've done. I'm Duhad. Joining me is Colonel D. Fraug, formerly of this channel.
Yo.
And Morath, who I've done a lot of collaborations with. I actually know both of these two. In fact, I actually met both of these two through a game, a role-playing game that we're going to be talking about.
And aren't you so very sad that you did?
Oh my god, yes. It's truly the greatest experience of my life has been knowing you two. At any rate, DeFrog, you were the one who ran the game, so why don't you start us off?
That's right. Okay, so, folks, this was done in the West End D6 system for Star Wars, which was the early original Star Wars role-playing game. It's the one where the EU really kind of came from. Anyway,
expanded universe for those of you outside of the know.
Yes. For those of you who are far less geeky than I. Anyway, so it was actually a second run of the original concept. And, unfortunately, this is going to require a little bit of geeky explaining the EU to really go ahead and go over it. But here goes, or at least here we try and go. So, there was a book series in the EU called the Young Jedi Knight series, and it was, of course, a young adult novel series that essentially followed the children of Han Solo and Princess Leia. Spoilers. Seriously, if you haven't seen the original trilogy by now, stop, go, watch, come back. Anyway, so their kids went to Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy. He does set one up in the expanded universe, actually on Yavin 4. And it also has a couple of other characters in it that are connected to some other important characters. One of them is a Jedi Wookiee, who is Chewbacca's nephew, if I'm remembering it correctly. He's famously, actually, the character that went ahead, got George Lucas to say there can be no more Jedi Wookiees, ever. Yeah, I'm dead serious about that. Yeah, that's one of the things that is there in the EU. There will never, ever be another Jedi Wookiee. Or at least there weren't going to be up until Disney got a hold of it these days. So technically they could reverse that decision, but beside the point. I think he decided that both Wookiee and Jedi was too much awesome for one character, so no more of them. The other one was Tenel Ka, and he's much more invested in the EU than the other ones are. The son and daughter, or sons rather, and daughter of Han and Leia are from a more famous part of the EU, which is the Zahn novels, or the Thrawn trilogy, as most people call them. And most people know about that. The one that, the part of the EU that Tenel Ka comes from is called the Courtship of Princess Leia, and this is when Han and Leia actually finally do get married, and it introduces a group called Hapes, which is a cluster of, I think, 63 worlds, very rich cluster area, and they become a minor but important galactic military and economic power, and they show up again and again. This is somewhat important because of the fact that it becomes quite important during some of the later stuff in the EU, but she's their daughter, and she's the princess of the Hapes cluster, so very important folks all around. It's a very privileged bunch. But the original set of novels was, it was good fun. I read them way back when, and I always thought that was a good bit for a role-playing game. Because they go ahead and they have adventures based on, some things that happen. Like, the first adventure arc deals with a Dark Jedi Academy that comes up at the same time, and, they clash, and all sorts of stuff goes on. But, a number of the things that happen during there, they go ahead in very classic Star Wars high fantasy, or science fantasy, rather, fashion. They go ahead and they do things, and it's been taken care of, and you never go back to it, except for the fact that some of these actually did have potential for someone needing to go back and clean it up. And that was my original thought for this campaign. The player characters would be Jedi Academy students whose job it was to go ahead and clean up after the main characters. And that doesn't sound that interesting, but it ended up being a lot better than he might think. So I had to decide who their Jedi Master was going to be. And another bit of EU lore that comes up and becomes important here is that Mara Jade becomes Luke Skywalker's wife, created once again by Zahn. But these books were written before that happened. No one knew who Luke was going to end up with, so Mara Jade, of course, doesn't show up in them. There is an EU explanation for where she was, but I thought that it was, one, boring, and two, easily hand-wavable away, so I just threw it out the window and said, okay, the PCs are actually going to be Mara Jade's students. And the reason why this, as a second run, is somewhat important is because of the fact that, one, I had had a little bit of time to fine-tune it, shall we say, and two, the original PCs ended up being a major group of NPCs in this. Now, as you might imagine, we've got Duhad and Morath here because of the fact that they were actually two of the rather important PCs that were in this plot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much the setup. Though there's a lot more.
Yeah, I'm sure you could probably go on for hours about your original planning for this game, but
yeah, and you'll see how it kind of plays out, dear viewer, but these guys already know most of the story, so.
Right. So, game begins, and we had a pretty interesting group of players.
Yeah, we did. If I'm forgetting anyone and you actually watch this video, please forgive me, but I'm pretty sure I've got them all straight in my head. Of course, I have Duhad in this group. He was playing a character called Washin Keeg, who was a Duros. If you're not familiar with the EU, the Duros are, if you remember back to the Cantina scene in Star Wars, the blue-skinned, red-eyed aliens that kind of looked like a more classic one, they were kind of wearing spacesuits. That's the race that he was. And Washin was actually quite an interesting character. But I'll let Duhad go into him a little bit later, because this was an awesome character. He was. But, just set up there. Morath was playing a Togruta named Akul. And I'm sorry, I actually can't remember his last name.
This was Dawn at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Dawn, thank you. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Star Wars EU again, the Togruta, we actually get a couple of them in the main continuity. Shak Ti, who is a Jedi Master, is a Togruta, but probably the more famous one at the moment is Ahsoka Tano from the Clone Wars TV show and the Clone Wars movie. Yeah, she was a Togruta.
They're the red aliens with the big white horns.
The stripy head tail type things. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they, once again, it's Star Wars. Of course, they've been expanded upon massively in the. It's just what Star Wars does. So those are these two guys. Both of which were actually a lot of fun characters to see and GM for. But we also had a couple of others. We had a couple that were not so important. Probably the biggest one on the not so important was played by another person who's been on this channel a couple of times. If you know Tenma Ranger, she was playing a Gungan Force Sensitive who was coming to be a Jedi. This character really didn't stick around. Tenma was not particularly interested in Star Wars at the time. And dropped out of the game after, I think it was 2 sessions. Actually, no, just the 1 session. She just wasn't feeling it at the time.
Yeah.
We also had a character who was an Abyssin, one-eyed kind of brutish-looking thing. You see them once again in the Cantina scene, called Mador. He had a red eye, which is associated with being angry and dark-sided and all sorts of bad things. In fact, Abyssins are just considered to be brutes. Mador was not. Mador was a lot of fun. He was also somewhat less important, though he stuck around for most of it. He was less of a thing on the plot. He was more a fun side character.
Yeah.
And then we had 2 other characters that are actually relatively important. One was named Maine. He wasn't a human per se. He was actually another race, the Nagai, that's right. The Nagai were actually from the Star Wars comic books, and they were humans plus, essentially. They actually were from a small galaxy that kind of floated above the galactic plane, and they invaded in the post-Battle of Endor. And both the Empire and the Rebellion kind of put aside their differences and fought them back for a while, and yeah, it all turned out for the better, and the Nagai actually became part of Galactic Society. Which is amusing. Yeah, actually, which is amusing because it was one of the objections people had to a later thing in the EU, which becomes somewhat relevant for this game because it was going to be a more end point or a change point to this whole thing, which is the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, which happened much later. And people were complaining, you already did the Extragalactic Invaders storyline. Very different one, mind you, but they did do it.
Yeah.
But Main was important because the player for Main was very much a party leader type. And he did kind of take over that role. He was kind of a tough kid from the streets of Coruscant, if I'm remembering it correctly. Very street smart, all that sort of thing. He was also somewhat important because he had stolen a hover truck from one of Akul's family. Akul, if you want to go into this, Morath, please go ahead and take over. But Akul was a rich kid, and Main had stolen one of his family's hover trucks.
Yeah, we'll go into the two big player characters who were played by people in this recording after we've gone through all the other characters.
And like I said, he became party leader, and he kind of shared that job with Akul. The other important character was Brian. And Brian was pretty much just a human. I think he was said to be a quarter Achani, but that really didn't much matter. He was a human. He was based on the human template. And the thing about Brian was... and he's kind of one of the shames of this story, because this didn't end up very well for us. Brian became our Force guy. He was the guy who invested heavily into his Force power as compared to the rest of the people who had more of a thing dealing with their physical stats. So I think he went ahead and pulled off 2Ds from his physical stats so he could put them into Force, because he wanted to be the guy who, uses telekinesis, and he wanted to be the guy who sensed things. He wanted his Force to be the strongest of the party. He wanted to be the wizard.
Yeah.
And
he also was going to be the mechanic. Like he was. He was very much kind of the player who looks at a setting and then says, what would be the best thing to play in this setting for most useful abilities. And he's like, okay, guy who can.
Yeah, for those of you who read Darths and Droids, he was our Pete.
Yeah.
And if you don't read Darths and Droids, it's totally hysterical, and you really should.
Webcomic.
It's a webcomic that takes the Star Wars films and essentially makes them out to be a role-playing campaign. Lots of fun.
It's pretty good. But anyway.
So that was the main party.
No, it was
there was also another character that came up later, which we will introduce at the proper time.
Okay, fair enough. Because that's probably the most important character who isn't actually in this current call.
Yeah, for the record, folks, the three most important characters in this group are this other character that will come up, Akul, and Washin.
Yeah.
No question about this.
Yeah, and in fact, we would probably actually have that third player in this call right now if it wasn't for the fact that he is generally unavailable.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that he is not less important than either of the other two players who are in this call.
Oh no. In fact, if anything, he becomes just as, if not more, important later on.
Yeah.
This was actually another one of the characters that I just absolutely adored, and
we'll see if we can get him in here, at least for one call, just because he's an interesting dude.
That'd be great.
Yeah. At any rate, so yeah. In addition to those characters, we also kind of had the two of us who are actually in this call, and we can actually kind of go over a little bit of what we had originally had as ideas for these characters. Obviously, things over the course of the months that this game took changed a lot, but
actually, when it comes right down to it, character development and characters changing so far from their original concept almost seems to be a theme for this game, at least to me. It just this particular campaign setup, because it happened in the initial campaign as well.
Yeah. But Morath, you've been fairly quiet this entire time. You want to take this opportunity to explain a little bit more about Akul?
Yeah.
At concept stage.
Yeah. At concept stage, he was supposed to be a tactician. He turned out to be a tank somehow.
Kinda.
Accidental.
I think tanks are meant to be made out of, wet cardboard, but
yeah, he ended up being a jeep that kept on getting deployed as a tank.
that's better.
That's a better way of putting it. But anyway, he was supposed to be a tactician. We each had our own 4 specialties. His was actually battle meditation. Now that I think about it.
That's right.
But
that actually was just a quick point. One of the house rules that we added in here was to increase the power of the Force and make it attractive. I expanded upon some of the critical mechanics in West End D6 and also gave everyone a specialty in the Force, which is kind of upheld by canon as something that they just did extremely well.
Yeah. So it's like, I think Brian could read machines, Washington had danger sense, Akul had battle meditation. I forget what Medor had.
Medor.
Regenerative stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's right. He actually did have a force healing that was extremely good, especially when stacked with the fact that Abyssins actually have a regenerative function as well.
Right, and Maine, I think, had a charisma-based
yeah,
thing.
he was very good at the Jedi mind trick.
Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense given who played him, but
yeah, it did.
Very much a silver-tongued individual, that gentleman.
Yes, indeed.
But okay, so apart from being originally intended as a tactician and having battle meditation, what was the idea for Akul?
Well, he was supposed to be... Togruta are typically a very earthy type of people. I'm not sure whether or not I'd be amiss saying that they were based on Native Americans. But
definitely on a tribal culture.
Yeah, very tribal cultured. A lot of them purposefully don't wear shoes because it makes them feel uncomfortable when they're walking on the ground.
Oh my god, they're all earthbenders.
I was going to say they sound like hobbits.
Yeah.
Not that short.
True.
So, they tend to have this tribal culture. However, Akul comes from a family that was, kind of based out of Thyfera. And my entire intention with him was to kind of meld city culture with the Togruta culture.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, folks, in the EU, Thyfera is the place where Bacta is from. Bacta is a miracle medicine. You see Luke in a tank of it in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, in game terms, it's basically what health packs are made out of.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so my entire point was to get that sort of being an upper-class city kid mixed with being from a culture that is the exact opposite.
Right. Can I actually just interject real quick? I just realized something that made me kind of sad.
What?
I was gonna say, well, the thing is, the best way of thinking about Bacta in for the people who are unfamiliar with Star Wars would be to say it's like health packs in video games, and I just realized, shit, I actually have to clarify that by saying, back in the day, we had these things in video games called health packs that were generated through health.
Actually, it's the way that most people think that Metagel works in the Mass Effect universe. And in fact, in-game, how it does work, though not in-universe.
Yeah, but anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Boy,
that makes
actually
us
great.
Really old.
I know, right? Oh, God.
Yeah, so... He was supposed to have, just stuff that had... He did stuff like he used to bite things a lot, and Togruta do that a lot.
I remember that comlink.
You mean links.
No, I'm talking about the old style one that was given to you explicitly so you wouldn't destroy it.
And I still managed to somehow.
Yes, you did.
And he's never really wanted for anything until he hits the Jedi Academy. But a lot of the character development that comes later was based on how family-oriented he was. And now that he's been, that's another thing. They seem to be they're a very close-knit culture. Which is
I would
weird.
call them clannish, yeah.
Yeah, which is weird because Shaak Ti is a loner.
Yeah, but you gotta keep in mind that she was taken by the Jedi during the post-Rusan Reformation, so she never grew up as a Togruta, she grew up as a Jedi.
Right. Fair point. Since they're so family-oriented, he's his fellow students become kind of his family, despite hating each one of their guts at one time or another. But isn't that the way that siblings are supposed to be anyway?
Not the way whatever, we'll get to that.
Well, I've heard that, but, I'm an only child, so what can I say on the matter?
Yeah. Right. So then
Washin.
Yeah, then we had Washin, who I actually came to the group really, last minute. In fact, I had basically found out that, Main's player, who was a friend of it's sort of a friend of mine. We became closer later on, but at the time, he was kind of a friend of mine and a really good friend, a very old friend of mine at the college that we were both going to. And I'd been looking to get into a role-playing group for a while, and when I found out that he was, at that moment, when I went to go and see my friend, at that moment, Main's player was just making a character for this game in the first session of this game. I kind of ran down and volunteered to join in. I was like, hey, there's a slot open.
You gotta understand, folks, we were in a closed room. And so what happens is, I'm actually looking at the door because I'm looking at one of the people who's making a character, and door bursts open, and in comes this guy who I've not really met before. And he's out of breath and panting, and he's going, do you have another spot for a character? And I'm just like, I look around and I go, kinda, yeah, sure, why not? Because, it was one of those things where I figured that I was going to probably lose a person or two, because I knew that Tenma was not particularly big on it at the time, and I figured that she'd go ahead and drop out. And I also figured that, we'd lose another person. So I figured, why not? Sometimes you have to start with a larger party than you're going to end up with.
Yeah.
Which happened big time.
Yeah, and I also kind of figured that because we didn't know you so well, that you were going to just go, yeah, this is totally not the group for me, and just peace out. And now years, and I do mean years later, this has been 5 years. This is half a decade ago.
5 years, an apartment, a number of different games, more shit than we could possibly...
YouTube crap, bunch of different stuff. And this is how I met him, because I was running a Star Wars game and he wanted to be in it very badly, and I felt that anyone who ran downstairs so much that they were out of breath like that, I should at least give the chance to.
It was my way of getting away from my girlfriend for the evening.
Fair enough. And the point is...
Do you have any idea how geeky awful that sounds? I didn't want to be with my girlfriend, so I'm going to play a role-playing game.
Yeah, my excuse for leaving and running down 3 flights of stairs is I was running away from Street Fighter the movie. At least I had an excuse.
That is a fun movie, damn it.
I still want to watch that at some point, but I at least
really
wasn't trying to get away
to.
from my girlfriend.
Well, no, we usually spent certain day. She had her group of friends, and I didn't like them, so I would that would be her time to go and hang out with them while I did something with my own group.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, that kind of makes sense, but I'm just saying, sight unseen, that sounded terrible.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, the point is, the point is, and this is important to the character, is that when I first joined the group, the only people I knew were Main's player, who I knew mostly through a friend, and Brian's player, who I had briefly been in another game with that had kind of fallen apart, but I at least kind of knew him as a role player, and I was like, okay, since I'm new, I want to try and use that to my advantage in terms of coming up with a character. So I essentially I was looking at the thing, I was like, oh, I'm going to make a pilot, because the group doesn't have a pilot, and that's a niche I can fill. And my character is going to be just a complete coward, because the idea of a complete coward, like neurotic coward Jedi was hilarious to me. And finally I decided, you know what, this is probably going to be a character who, especially because I was actually as unsure about the long term, how long I'd be in the game, as much as, the Frog was. I was like, I want to have a way out for this character, and that would be that this is someone who could easily end up turning to the dark side, not through being evil and power hungry, but by being kind of cowardly and two-faced. So I decided that he'd be this total toady to Brian.
Yeah.
It's super hilarious with what happens later on, but the initial concept was he was going to essentially turn into Brian's lackey.
Yeah, that didn't happen. I also remember, and this was astoundingly funny to me, is the character did have a specific thing that he was wearing. He was wearing an old Rebellion era, orange flight suit.
Yes.
But
this
you also said to me that he would never, ever, ever fly a starfighter. You were very clear on that.
Yeah, that was the thing. I was I was going to be a pilot, but I was not going to be a starfighter pilot. I was going to fly freight trucks and stuff, the equivalent of a trucker, of a space trucker.
Yeah, and I think that was actually your family's business that they
it was for a family of space truckers.
Yeah, and this actually, by the way, in the EU really makes a lot of sense. The Duros are sometimes, it's debated in universe who did it, but the Duros are one of the people who have the claim to developing the hyperdrive, which is the faster than light technology in Star Wars. And they do get some bonuses as in character creation towards, I think it's knowledge of space and such things. They're mostly humans, they just have an affinity for space as far as things go. Also, right. Blue skin, red eyes, giant bulbous heads.
Yeah, so the important things to take away from this, that'll be important later on, are initially wanted to try and be super close to Brian the character. Wanted to be a character who had basically no actual combat basically no really useful combat capabilities, and a character who was a complete coward. These will all be important later on.
Yeah, and as some of you who might have played a role-playing game before, you're going, wait a second, no useful combat capabilities? What is this? Yeah, our group tended to actually draw together a bunch of people who made characters who could easily be messed with in a certain way. For example, you heard how Akul earlier, we were talking about him being the tank, except he wasn't. He was the Jeep, was getting deployed as the tank. He had, no ability to take hits. Despite the fact that he kept on getting in fights, and, Washin was not going to be any good in a fight.
Maine was not very good in a fight.
Maine was better, but he wasn't good in a stand-up fight. In fact, we really didn't have anyone who's good in a stand-up fight, except for really Mador and also Tenma's character. Tenma's character would have been quite good in a fight, but, left.
Well, to be fair, I think Brian was supposed to be good in a fight. He was supposed to be kind of like a force cannon. It's just that the mechanics of the game and bad luck with rolls made it so that never really happened. But
that was kind of an issue for him.
Yeah, that was supposed to be, the two big fighter characters in the group were supposed to be Maine as the tank and Brian as the, arch-wizard.
Yeah, pretty
Mador.
much.
Yeah, Mador is the tank, but...
Yeah, Mador is the tank.
Yeah. The other interesting thing, at least for me, when being the GM of the two versions of this game, is the original party, almost all humans. And in this one, we only had one person who could lay claim to being a human, and even they had a little bit of crossbreeding of near human in them.
Yeah.
That just amused the shit out of me. It's human's not a bad way to make a character, and everyone goes, no, I want to play this or this or this. And in the first party I had, it was human, Twi'lek. Oh, sorry, and also Triani.
Right.
So it just amused the shit out of me that I had a majority human party earlier, though technically one of them was an Achani, but that's a near human, so it really doesn't count. Though it does have some bonuses to that. But And then, I had a Triani, who was easily the weirdest one, and then I had a Twi'lek, who might as well have been a human. They were only a Twi'lek because, alien, and it was Star Warsy.
Star Wars is probably the most famous, outside of, obviously, Wookiee, it's probably the most famous, iconic Star Wars alien.
Yeah, pretty much. Either that or Ewok.
For different reasons. But
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so that original party, so much human going on. This party, so little human going on. I mean, very seriously, when you think about it, you had the Abyssin, which is a giant Cyclops monster. You had the Duros, which is essentially a gray alien. You've got the Togruta, which is, I suppose you could call him a savage Twi'lek. You've got a Gungan, which, well, you've seen the movies. Think more Captain Tarpals than Jar Jar Binks, though. And then you've got the one human in there. It's just, what the hell? These are so completely different parties.
Pretty much. But let's get into the actual game, because I think we've established our party pretty well.
Yeah, that hopefully it took us 30 minutes to do so.
Yeah.
Well, also some background EU, all that kind of good stuff. Anyway, so the game, of course, starts with everyone coming to the Jedi Academy. And actually, we're going to have another character dump here, though hopefully it won't take quite so long.
Yeah, this is more about non-player characters, so it's a little less crazy.
Yeah, but, well, actually, it's just as crazy. Keep in mind, they were originally PCs. Yeah, so they come to the Jedi Academy, and they're dropped off, and one of the things that kind of comes up later in the EU is that, or really, actually, it came mostly from the Jedi Academy game, which was part of the Dark Forces series. So I think it was, Jedi Knight 3 Jedi Academy, which was the fourth in the Dark Forces series. Yeah, I know, it's really confusing. But the idea is that you are given a master, and your master works with a small group of people. And I figured that was a good way of essentially, okay, here's a mentor character who can be a big gun if we need them to, yada yada. And that was, the reason why I chose Mara Jade, because she worked a little bit more in the whole Black Ops end of the thing. She would deal with the kind of crap that PCs get into. Let's face it, PCs always get into crazy shit. So the idea was that the main characters from the Young Jedi Knights books, so Jason Jaina, Lobaka, and Tenel Ka, would be essentially Luke's project. He was the Grand Master, but he also was really the one that they mostly talked to. So they were Luke's students, whereas the PCs would be Mara Jade's students. And for those of you who haven't read Zahn's books, or really a lot of the Star Wars EU by this point, Mara Jade is a certified badass. She was originally one of the Emperor's Force-sensitive problem solvers, to put it nicely. And the interesting thing about her is, even though she was working for the Emperor, she was actually never really dark-sided. And this is brought up in some of the EU novels. Anyway, she ends up being the one who finally gets with Luke in the end, and she's a lot of fun. She's a very sarcastic character, has a real personality. Some people have called her Mary Sue at times, but screw you, Mara Jade's awesome. And anyway,
some writers probably had her lean a little bit more towards that than others, but yeah.
Yeah, almost certainly. But I'm just talking about the original Zahn creation.
Yeah. By the way, if you haven't read the Zahn books, the Thrawn trilogy, there's a reason why, if you hear about, Star Wars books, you're hearing about, the character of Thrawn and other characters that came out of those books, is because those books are freaking awesome.
Yeah, Zahn, when he wrote the Thrawn trilogy, he pretty much saved the EU of Star Wars, because originally it was pretty much just derided and not really considered to be anything worthwhile. It was, it was paid for fan fiction before that was really a big thing. Because you got to keep in mind that the original EU stuff was being made in the 70s.
Yeah.
But Thrawn and the West End Games books actually were part of the thing that expanded them. Anyway, what Zahn did is he essentially took a look at the West End Games books, he took a look at them, synthesized them, and he created this whole new trilogy of books that expanded from the original events from the movies, but created just a bunch of really interesting characters. There was political intrigue, there was action. The main bad guy wasn't just this cackling evil dude who would just off his troopers for no reason. He was smart, he was intelligent, and we also got Mara Jade out of it. It had wonderful character development for Luke. It was very, very cool writing. And from that, essentially, the EU got saved, and it ballooned out from there. And frankly, very few of the writers are as good as Zahn is, but it really created the Star Wars universe from there. So, in a lot of ways, the Star Wars universe being as diverse and wonderful and interesting as it is as much Zahn's... It's not quite as much Zahn's as it is George Lucas's thing, but he's very important to this.
Yeah. So, yeah, just for context of what we're talking about when we're talking about Mara Jade and all that stuff, Timothy Zahn is the person you're going to want to Google to figure out what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, start with Heir to the Empire. Trust us. It's good stuff. Anyway, so Mara Jade, like I said, eventually becomes Luke's wife, and she becomes a Jedi Master in her own right, and, a badass even more so than she was. So I go ahead and say, okay, as Luke, I essentially say, hey, okay, you will be assigned to Master Mara Jade Skywalker, my wife. Try not to give her too much trouble. Yeah, PCs, of course they are. So she goes ahead and says, okay, you're now my students, that kind of thing. We'll do some training in the morning, and essentially lets them be themselves for a while. So, they can work out a little bit of in-character stuff.
Right, yes.
Did you guys want to go on about any of the early stuff that was going on there? Or...
To be completely honest, the very, very early stuff, it being a couple of years later, is a bit of a blur. I remember most of the important stuff from a little bit later on, but especially the right at the beginning stuff, I mostly can't remember.
Okay. Well, also, to be fair, at the very beginning, Washington wasn't talking very much.
That's true.
Mostly because the conversation, as I remember it anyway, was mostly taken over by the fact that Morath's character, Akul, and Maine were arguing over what had happened, because Maine had let slip the reason why he was taken to the Jedi Academy. He essentially got it as a whole, well, you're a Force sensitive, and you've been doing, kind of crappy shit on the streets, so you should totally go ahead and go here and, wise up a little bit. And he was talking to, I think it was actually to Tenma's Gungan about it, and Akul overheard.
Oh yes, that he had stolen my speeder.
Yes. And I think you kept on trying to get him to pay for it or some such. And he goes, "Oh, totally, I'll pay for it." No way that he could. No way whatsoever. But yeah, the early stuff, I think, you saw a couple of characters that were kind of, sort of, not really important. We had the first appearance of the actual canon characters from this time frame during this, but yeah, not a whole terribly large amount happened at the time. So then, you guys got woken up in the morning. Really, really early. Because Mara Jade had decided that if she was going to train you, she was going to train you right, and that meant, out before the crack of dawn, running through the woods, and if you weren't fast enough to get your boots on, well, you'd run without them.
You're a big believer in the Full Metal Jacket school of training.
Yeah. That's one way of putting it. But, yeah, so that was kind of the rude first introduction to how Mara Jade was actually going to handle you guys. Because it seemed like she was going to be all nice and wonderful. And I seem to remember one of the PCs, I can't remember who, asking me, so why exactly did she just be so nice to us? And then I got the, evil GMs.
I think that was probably either...
I think it might have been Brian's player.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Because I remember that like there were varying levels of knowledge about the EU going into it. I know that Main's character kind of sort of was like he was aware of some of the bigger stuff. I know Brian was like really into it. Morath was fairly knowledgeable.
And I also seem to remember that once the game started, Morath started a epic Wikipedia crawl.
Right, yeah, because then
Yes.
he became like really, really knowledgeable.
You seem to do that for like every game you're in, Morath.
It's research. But yeah, no. What my thing there was that I was trying to get to where it was, where common everyday references that people could make would be understood, instead of having to have it so that you would have to explain everything to us.
Yeah, I actually remember passing out copies of a sheet with common Star Wars swears on them.
God, yeah.
Yes.
Those things. Yeah, because I remember I like went to the thing basically completely blind, like having read nothing of the EU, like only knowing things from the movies. So like the introduction of characters like Mara J was just like,
Who the hell is
why
this?
is she being so nice to us? Is she supposed to not be?
To be fair, actually one of the fun things about Mara Jade, and going back to Zahn a bit, is her name actually apparently translates to bitter woman.
The reason that that was actually me that asked that, and that was because I knew what she had done beforehand.
Right, that does seem like you. You do always kind of have this thing where it's like, wait a minute, I know this canon character, and I know that they should be... I believe that they should be more evil than this because of what they've done in the past. I'm going to call you out on that.
And this is coming from the person who bought the Rust Red Protocol droid, the old Rust Red Protocol droid. That will come up later, folks.
Yeah, that's
because that was a fun episode.
Jesus. So right, yeah, we were going through the training from hell thing, and after that was complete, that was actually I think where we started really meeting the NPCs that would be really important to the story.
Actually, quick point of order. The first thing that you ran into was the original characters, because I remember that's when specifically you, Duhad, started talking to them. And I believe you talked to Jason first, because
right.
he, being the friendly dude that he is, who can't help but make really terrible jokes. Yeah, I know, right? He asked you why you were lying on a rock with, bloody feet and just going, oh, God.
Right.
Or rather, oh, force.
I think it wasn't something I originally had in mind, like, when I first set down the character, but I think, like, almost immediately after the game started, I came up with the idea that, like, one of the few things, being, like, the guy who didn't know anything about the EU, I was, like, latching on to anything I actually knew about the original series. And one thing I knew about the original series, without a doubt, was that Han Solo was the biggest badass ever.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. I loved this.
So I decided, you know what? If there's going to be one thing that Washington as a character is going to know, it is that Han Solo is the biggest badass ever. And, like, to further justify this, just, like, to blow this into ridiculous proportions, I also decided, you know what? Like, propaganda is a thing.
Yeah.
And you know who probably has a ton of propaganda? This
is actually not even supposition. This happened in the EU.
Oh, I found that out later, but like I just assumed, like.
Oh yeah,
I
remember that you assumed this, and you told me this, and I went, "No, that's actually a thing." And you go,
yeah.
"Wait, what?" Yeah, I've been reading a book lately that actually went ahead and did this.
Perfect, but yeah, the thing was, I was just sort of like, you know what? No, there's like all this propaganda out there. There's like all this ridiculous like breakfast cereal box bullshit out there, like horrible movies and like big great crap. And he owns all of it. Like, he is the biggest nerd for this one person. And so...
that actually gave me a really awesome idea back when I was GMing for this.
Really?
That actual thing that you were talking about. Yeah, that's actually what made me come up with the idea of the generalized knowledge check and filtering it through holodramas.
That's actually kind of cool. But anyway, the point is, the reason... Fraug decided, you know what, you're going to meet Jason is because he's one of Han Solo's kids in the Again, important later on.
Yeah, just a little bit. But yeah, so that idea was actually what gave me the idea for the generalized knowledge check, which ended up being exceedingly useful and also gave us a couple of really funny moments that happened. Because if you flubbed it, I still gave you an answer, but it was completely and totally twisted by the holodrama writers that you had gotten it from. So, at one point, probably my favorite example was the time when you, Duhad, you flubbed a check, and you were talking about how Han Solo had done this thing. And it was essentially the duel that went down on Mustafar in Episode 3 between Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker, except Han Solo was Obi-Wan.
Yes. And I decided, after the check was flubbed, some players, when they flub a check, will be like, oh, okay, well, whatever, fine, I don't actually,
this guy played with it.
I was like, no, you know what? He legitimately believes this. I got in a heated argument with one of the other characters about how it was
Maine.
With him, yes, about how it was totally him, on the planet. And he's actually a Jedi, technically.
No, it wasn't that he was a Jedi. He was doing this with a blaster. And I remember the thing was that whenever, the dude would, because it wasn't Anakin Skywalker that he was fighting, but whenever this dark Jedi would swing it at him, he'd pull the gun and shoot it right as it was there to deflect the lightsaber off to the side.
Yes.
It was the most ridiculous comic book bullshit ever. And this character was just saying, oh no, it's totally true. And the fun part is, this character, you gotta remember, is 14. So it's the kind of shit that a 14-year-old might actually believe.
Yeah.
And Maine's just going, dude, that shit is ridiculous. That would never, ever work. And Washington is just going ahead and saying, no, it's true, I saw it. And there was a book about it too. And, that's the way that lightsabers can deflect blaster bolts, so it certainly has to work the other way. And the rest of the party's just laughing their asses off at this. It was wonderful.
I can't remember any of the names anymore, but I actually came up with a big list of names of bullshit movies that started.
Right?
It was the most insane, ridiculous pulp movie titles.
Yeah, these things were straight out of the Dr. Tran list.
Yeah.
Except they were the Han Solo list.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
They were good.
Oh my god. Anyway.
I also seem to remember that the accurate one on the Battle of Yavin you didn't like very much.
Right.
Because Han Solo essentially only showed up in a supporting role. Yeah, sure, he saved the day by saving Luke, but yeah, he was totally Han Solo that made that shot.
Yeah, it should have been.
Oh boy, yeah, that was so much fun.
Oh god. Anyway.
Yeah, back on topic. It's technically on topic.
It's on topic. It's a topic.
But back with the plot. So they went ahead and they also met after they got some time to recuperate, and they learned very well that yes, you go to sleep wearing your boots. They ended up meeting the previous party essentially. Previous party had originally been the Padawans, so to speak, of Mara Jade, the apprentices. But in this one, I decided to take a different route with them. They were slightly older, by and large, than the party that we did have this time. But one of the characters was from a planet called Adamar. And the player for this character, she was one of the people who was the driving force behind this game getting going. She was actually the person who introduced me to Star Wars West End D6, and actually, she was the person who GM'd my first game in it, after which I went ahead and GM'd this other game. So yeah, this is actually my first campaign that we're talking about, or at least the first campaign that I created.
Yeah.
Did a lot better than I thought it would.
Yeah, no, totally.
Anyway, so the character was from a planet called Adamar. Adamar shows up in the X-Wing novels, and specifically one from Aaron Alston, who recently has passed on, but also another very fun Star Wars author, and it was called the Starfighters of Adamar. Adamar was a kind of lost colony from the Old Republic, and they had gone ahead and fractured into a bunch of different nations on this one planet. And the other thing about them is that they were completely and totally worshipful of starfighter pilots. They were just absolutely gaga with them. There was also a culture of dueling on Adamar, which had one of the most ridiculous weapons that is, well, not one of the most ridiculous, but a thoroughly ridiculous weapon that has come up in science fantasy, which was this rapier, essentially, that instead of a tip, it had, like, a blaster rifle muzzle on the end of it. And what you had to do is you had to push it against the person at which you would fire and essentially hit them with a blaster rifle shot point blank. And probably the best way of describing it is actually from one of the characters in the novel, Wes Jansen, who said, so it's like a blaster that you have to hit someone with. I have to have one. And yeah, like, the second way of becoming, a big thing, in the only real way of getting upward social mobility was being a blast sword duelist, because you could win great honor that way. The only people who were fighter pilots were nobles. But anyway, in the books, Wedge Antilles and a number of the famous characters from the X-Wing series, a number of characters from Rogue Squadron, go ahead and they bring the Adamar into the New Republic. And, of course, they become a little bit more civilized, shall we say, because they were really kind of big into blood sport at the time. But the other thing is, of course, that on Adamar, the hero worship that, Washin's character, that Washin was doing towards Han Solo, yeah, you have that pretty much towards the members of Rogue Squadron, because Han Solo was a badass, but, bitch flew a freighter about. We don't care about him. The members of Rogue Squadron, though, they're flying X-Wings. X-Wings are where it's at.
If you're an idiot, I suppose.
But anyway, so this character was Alira Datara, if I'm remembering the name correctly. And she was from Adamar. She had actually been born previous to them joining the New Republic, but she grew up most of her life under the New Republic. And she was originally a blast sword duelist, and of course, being like anyone, she wanted to be a fighter pilot. And she was lucky in that, because of the fact that they were now part of the New Republic, there was actually more upward social mobility for her. And she was going to try and get off of the world to become a fighter pilot. But what happened was she, initially made her way as a blast sword duelist. Her family went ahead and, kind of lived on that at least a little. And then eventually she ran off, because she was also a mechanic, by the by. She ran off and she was caught out as a force sensitive. And the person who they sent to go pick her up was Corran Horn. Now, Corran Horn is another character that often gets kind of lambasted as a Mary Sue. Michael A. Stackpole created him, and he's a Corellian fighter pilot who's originally a cop and turned out to be force sensitive and becomes a Jedi Master. Yeah, I can't imagine why anyone would call this character out as being a Mary Sue, but I actually like him. He's kind of fun. But anyway, he was the person who came and picked her up and said, you should totally become a Jedi. And it wasn't the fact that he was a Jedi that made her go. It was more the fact of, oh my God, this guy flew in Rogue Squadron. I want to be his student. And maybe I can get into Rogue Squadron through following him. So she followed him. Well, of course, in the first one, she didn't get to be his student. But when it came right down to it, the original group of characters probably should have been Corran Horn's students. So I said, why not? He doesn't have, any students at the time, so let's go ahead and put them off on him. And the main characters, our PCs, will be Mara Jade's students. But these guys were a group of characters that had gone through it beforehand. Minus one, essentially, because he didn't fit the group so much, so he became a kind of off-to-the-side thing. Now, Alira was obviously a big one of them, and she's relatively important to this whole story, but, beside the point. The other ones were Layla Armadozi, who was the Twi'lek, she was from Coruscant, and she was the daughter of a New Republic intelligence, I don't remember if he was an analyst. I think he was actually a little bit higher up than that. But he essentially was a spy. And she started out as this very sweet girl, but she ended up being probably the scariest of the bunch because of the fact that she started to apply very Mara Jade-like methods. which was fun. There was also Talbane, who was essentially an earlier version of Maine. He was also from the streets of Coruscant, but he was thuggier, shall we say. He was played by a friend of mine who was also kind of a little bit from the streets. Very geeky, but awesome dude. I actually like Talbane a lot. He ended up in the first game actually having like a claymore lightsaber. It was a lot of fun. Just this ridiculous thing.
Is that actually possible? Like within the game?
Really what I did is I gave it like a +2 damage boost, not even dice, and just said, you've got this. It was for flavor's sake, really. I don't think I even gave it a damage boost. Because a lightsaber's a lightsaber, man.
Yeah.
So, let's see. And then... What am I forgetting? Oh, right, Keskel. Keskel had a kind of odd genesis, shall we say. I'm going to get to Rel later, because he was the other member of the party. But Keskel had an odd genesis. He was originally a GMPC, and the idea behind him is I wanted a character there that they could, throw at a combat situation and everything, that would be able to, help them out quite a bit. But he was supposed to be, well, honestly, he was supposed to be a surfer bum. That was the original conception of the dude. He was a surfer bum who actually happened to be a legitimately competent martial artist. He was from the Moncal homeworld, so he had, no nudity taboo. He was supposed to just be completely and totally laid back and such. The unfortunate part was, the previous campaign that I had been in, with the same, players and such, I was, without a question, the party leader. And so everyone just looks at this GMPC, who was totally supposed to be the furthest thing from a party leader possible, and goes, so what should we do? What? What? And so I, went ahead and said, okay, so he's, he says you should do this. And it was generally not very good advice. They did it anyway. They never stopped doing it. So he ended up having to grow by character development because of the crap that kept on getting put onto him.
Oh, God. You basically
so this surfer bum dude ends up being this competent Jedi leader.
Oh my God.
What the hell? This is the reason why I say that character development and characters not being the same thing as what they were supposed to originally be has kind of been a theme for me with these.
Yeah, I kind of love the fact that this GMPC basically turned into, essentially became Brian. That your party was just essentially, following around this poor schmuck who was completely incompetent and going, he said it, it must be true.
Yeah, it was like as if in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, everyone just says, Arthur Dent, he's got the plan. The hell? It's not even as if I was playing this guy as if he had any hidden reserves of competence except in a fight. Every single time they went ahead and followed his advice, at least something bad would happen. There was always a complication to it. Except by the end of it, at which point they were going, well, yeah, he's totally the party leader. We just listened to him, and I just went, okay, fine. You know what? He's grown over this. He's actually become competent. That's the Keskel that you guys met.
Right.
Because, when you met the NPC Keskel, he was, of course, the party leader of this group. They were being trained by Corran Horn, who was, a cop, he was military, he looked at them in that way, and they kind of had a defined ranking structure, and Keskel was the student leader. Elira was the second in command. And they ended up being, some pretty competent people. They had gone through some adventures, which I had already sketched out in my head previous to that, which let them become what they were. And there was also Rel, who was a Triani, who comes from some of the earliest EU, and he was from the woods, and he showed it. Rel was
Mountain
fun.
Man.
Yeah, pretty much. Except he was a mountain kitty. Goddamn
Right.
cougars. Red Dead Redemption.
Cougars.
Fucking ninja cougars. Anyway, but he was actually a lot of fun. The interesting thing about him, with respect to the previous group is originally Layla and Rel were played by two different players. They actually switched their characters because, frankly, the person who was playing Rel was the very inventive one, probably the most inventive person in the group. And that's the reason why Layla became so scary, is because he started playing her. And started using plans with mines and flashbangs, and it just started using spy stuff. Also, the dude was a mechanical engineer, so yeah. Another one of his characters in another game was given, and this is the previous game I was talking about, the one that Alira's player GM'd. She was foolish enough to give him let him get a hold, or create, rather, these essentially bouncy ball grenades that were like super balls with a grenade inside. And because he could create them, he made a bunch of them. So we were supposed to hold off this large group of people while, a climactic lightsaber duel happened behind us. What he did is he took along the satchel full of these things, tossed them, activated them, tossed them out into the hallway, shut the door, and we just listened to the explosions. He was a lot of fun to game with.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Okay,
he also had an auto shotty.
Oh, jeez. Okay, so that's Saberflight then, right?
Yeah, and then there was Rel, who was kind of off to the side.
Yeah, I don't think the thing was Rel's character arc was pretty much just that he was friends with
Mador and Tenma's character.
And since neither of them ended up really becoming super main characters.
Mador was for a while, but
he was for a while. But
essentially, the Gungan went off with Rel as kind of a sop to say this is where this character is, and if Tenma wanted to come back, which eventually didn't happen.
So the point was that Rel eventually was kind of phased out of the story almost altogether because he was always the only time
he was in the woods. He was always in the woods. There was a reason for Rel being there.
Exactly. Yeah, but the thing was we're not gonna go too much into Rel just because he never really had any impact on the main story.
I'll be perfectly honest, there were some funny stories about Rel, but they happened in the first game, so that really isn't relevant to the one we're talking about.
Yes.
So, you two remind me to tell you about the Pinwheel of Death sometime.
Yes. We'll tell you to tell that story.
Oh, right. There was also one more character who was relatively relevant. That was R7P4. R7P4 was another character who came from the first game. He was obviously a astromech droid, specifically one that was made to work with the E-Wing fighter, which tied in with Keskel. But he could talk. He was a prototype unit. And he was played by the significant other of Alira's player at a time when they really weren't getting along too well. That shit caused some troubles. So Alira hated that robot, and P4 was kind of arrogant, shall we say. Extremely devoted to Keskel, but everyone else could kind of go and burn as far as he was concerned.
Right.
But yeah, so this group showed up.
This group we just spent the last 20 minutes describing. They will mostly be important later on.
Yeah. One of the things about this game, and one of the reasons why we loved it so much, is because of the fact that the PCs were actually relatively invested in the NPCs for what would be considered normal gamer behavior, shall we say, which is, I can stab them and take their stuff, right? Oh, they're giving me a quest, right? Yeah, no. These people actually did get along with, they had decently complex relationships with each of them.
Yeah, this is the reason we're it seems like we're spending an hour mostly just talking about the characters, like the initial characters,
which we are.
Which we are. It's because that is a big part of why this game becomes so interesting, is because of what happens with those various characters. So it's a little bit of a slower start, but that's because we don't want to slow down the story as it gets interesting with all these. Oh, and to go back and explain who this character is, let's interrupt the flow of the narrative to explain that. All that out of the way up front, and then we get, and now we're getting into the into where all this goes. Because with one exception, who will come in a little bit later on and is fairly important, this is all the main players. These are all the main characters basically covered.
And frankly, the interesting thing about this other player character is he needs only a very little bit of introduction, and then all his, real character development happens with the party.
Yeah. Which is part of what made him so interesting. That he was this very blank slate character that, over time just developed as this fantastic character.
Yes.
And just a very funny player.
Anyway, so back to our PCs meeting this important group of NPCs. There were a couple of other canon characters that became important, including, and there was one NPC that was there, just to essentially give you an antagonist in the actual Jedi Academy. He ended up not being very important whatsoever.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Yeah.
What's his face?
Yeah, I do have funny stories about him from the first game. That's beside the point.
There's still some pretty good ones that I remember.
Oh, right, when you guys dicked with him.
Yeah.
You can't remember his name, but there were some funny stories.
But yeah, we'll get to those when we actually had the virus.
Oh, the virus. This is going to kick the rating up at least a couple of notches, considering what the nature of the virus was.
Yeah, but
you are not censoring
We'll stop referring
that,
to this
sir.
thing right now because it is not an in-joke. This is actually part of the story, but it comes in a little bit later on.
Yes. Oh boy. Right, so the group meets this group, and essentially Mara Jade has to do something else. So she goes ahead and hands over her students for a while to Cornhorn, who is not nearly so mean about his training, and goes ahead and just essentially says, "Okay, Kitty, they obviously need a rest. Go ahead, help them out, teach them about this place, because they are as green as grass." What, you guys were? Except for Washington. He was as blue as the milk on Tatooine.
But Tish.
Oh, it's been a while since I could make a Star Wars joke like that.
Wow.
I miss
Nerd.
it. Yeah, I know, right? Anyway, so beside the point. So Washin is mostly actually interacting still with the main characters, especially Jason.
Yeah. Part of this
who was
I was going to say, part of this being the fact because a lot of the interaction with the other trainees was by the rest of the party, the rest of the player characters essentially going like, "Hey, we want to spar with those guys. Like, we want to spar with those guys because they have cool fighting styles, and we want to learn those cool fighting styles." And Washin being the a combat character that he was sort of like, "I'm gonna go and just screw around with some other kids and have fun."
Yeah, pretty much. By the way, for those of you who don't know in the EU, at this point in the EU, Jason is essentially obsessed with plants and animals, especially animals. He's very good-natured. Just completely and totally light-sided.
Yeah.
Later in the EU, they kind of mess with that bit of his character.
He turns into Super Vader, but anyway.
Super Vader! Yeah.
In the part of the EU that I ignore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the stated goals of the party later on was to make that not happen.
Yeah, but at any rate.
Anyway, that's a big Star Wars-y rant at any other point. So, what happens is, Akul, who is a 15-year-old who smokes Nick sticks.
Which are the equivalent of cigarettes.
Yes. And Maine start chatting up the two female members of Saberflight. And Maine goes ahead and makes a beeline for the Twi'lek. I seem to remember that you were actually somewhat disappointed in the fact that he got in on the Twi'lek first at the time there, Morath.
I don't remember exactly. I remember there being an argument about such things. And some Rochambeau. But
yes.
Other than that, what you got to understand is, believe it or not, he and I, his player and I, actually knew each other before we'd even been to that school.
Yeah. You knew each other from the previous school that you'd been at.
Yeah, so we'd known each other forever. So it was kind of like a. It was kind of a what we would do in real life situation. when we both
To be
had.
fair, it didn't hurt the fact that the two of you were the two biggest ladies' men in the entire group. Like,
Yeah, no question.
it was like, oh, it's the role-playing version of what we do every single night.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, not me at the time. I actually did have a steady girlfriend at that point, but yeah.
Right, but like the two of you are iconic in the group for just being.
Yeah,
The
and let's
biggest
face it, Akul had a lot of you in him. Like, a lot. Anyway, so, so Akul went ahead and, kind of swerved off from the Twi'lek lady and headed for Alira, who was human. And though Morath didn't know it at the time, I had actually been told that if I was going to use Alira as a NPC in anything further, that she would not get in a relationship with any of the player characters or any of the NPCs.
That worked out super well.
Yeah. And part of this was that Alira's player wanted to be able to get in, like over the internet or whatever, in any playing of this game, because she loved it just about as much as Duhad loved it.
Oh, and I loved it.
Yeah. Lots and lots. I think there might have been a shrine at one point. You think I'm joking, folks, but at the time he was big on this game.
I broke my, at the time, absolutely zero tolerance, no fanfiction rule to write a, like when the game went on a 3-month long hiatus, to write a story continuing the filling out the backstory on some of the characters, because
the Judy Knights.
Yes.
Damn it! I looked it up on Wikipedia. Yeah, that's not how it's spelled, dude.
Son of a bitch. Anyway, continue though.
Wait, which one was this?
We'll get to the story of the Judy.
Yeah,
Knights,
we'll get to it later
on.
because that was something that happened
at a very particular time. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Akul starts chatting Alira up. And I seem to remember that you used the opening that she was actually one of the badasses in the party, in the Saberflight party, to try and, start getting training out of her, and you figured you'd turn some grappling training into a good time.
Well, actually, initially it was just because she and I both used rapier-like weapons.
Oh, that's right, you had a Vigra rapier. Yeah, that's right.
So initially it was purely... because remember, I did grappling training with Caskel, which,
oh boy.
if it turned into a good time, would not be in my favor.
You'd be in the position of the sheep.
Yes. So it was initially just blast sword via, that sort of training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she turned it onto shock, showed you some moves. And, showed you that she was actually a legitimate badass with that thing. I mean, she was a professional duelist previous.
Yeah, you wouldn't let me get one of those swords, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there was actually a reason for that. You really can't get them off of Adamar. They're extremely rare. Like, extremely, even if you are a rich boy.
Yes.
And you pulled that rich boy crap a lot.
Yes, you did.
Keep a running tally, folks, because he would pull out his daddy's credit card in-game so much.
To be fair, he didn't do it until you guys actually got off planet. That's beside the point. There was nothing to buy at the Jedi Academy.
Well, that being said, we also didn't have a credit number.
Yeah.
So I use that as kind of a, hey, here's a cash reserve, because we're not given one.
No, you were actually given a mission credit reserve.
Yeah, but we didn't know the number either. Like, my character went from having a job to having no job.
Mm-hmm.
We're not getting paid for it in any conceivable way. So since we didn't know an active credit limit, we were just kind of told whether or not we could have something.
Right, because honestly, with the way that Star Wars goes ahead and does stuff, and the way that I like to run rules light, there really wasn't much of a point in having you say, okay, this is exactly how many credits you have.
Yeah.
Money feels kind of nebulous, but anyway.
Yeah, really nebulous. Anyway, so you guys got on with them, and I believe it was actually Brian, Akul, and Mador who actually started taking lessons from Keskel. Because Keskel was an Achani, and quick EU divergence here. The Achani, they're essentially a group of near-humans that believe very strongly in martial arts. Their martial arts are actually what the Imperial Royal Guard used. So the dudes in the red robes from the original trilogy.
Evil motherfuckers.
Yeah, they were, in fact. There was actually some stuff with Keskel's clan that got tied into that. But that was, just a bunch of backstory that you guys had no reason to know and wasn't going to come up. But yeah, there was a lot of planning done for a number of these characters. Like a lot.
Yeah.
So you guys went ahead and did that, so you had that light day. So some of you decided that the light day wasn't light enough and you wanted to get your asses beat anyway, so you got your asses beat. Yeah. So you woke up the next day, you went on a run, and this happened a couple of times. And then, one day, something happened when you were on one of your runs.
And the
you
game
guys
suddenly went from, this is kind of fun, to, oh god, this might actually be something special.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, again, on Star Wars, the jungles of Yavin 4 have more than just that one temple in there. And EU actually tells us what had kind of gone on with that. Essentially, a old-timey Sith had gone ahead and created these temples by enslaving the people who had been on the planet beforehand. The Masasi people, I believe it was.
I thought they were of Korriban.
Well, the person from the Sith was from Korriban. But they're referred to as the Masasi people. I can't remember exactly where it came from. But anyway, enslaved race on Yavin 4, building these temples that were actually Force amplifiers, essentially, specifically for the dark side of the Force. And this became important in actually the founding novels for the Jedi Academy, the oh-so-cleverly named Jedi Academy trilogy. I know, right? Anyway, but this had gone on in the past. Anyway, so one of the things that the students at the Jedi Academy would do, and this is, actually in canon in the EU, was they would go out and they would map these different temples, and they would learn about them, because as much as they were dark-sided in nature, no one really knew that, and they didn't know exactly how widespread the dark-sided nature of it was. And we actually have a number of them that are actually pointed out as, this is what's up with this temple. Like, there's the Temple of the Blue Leaf Cluster, the Temple of the Woolamander, and so on and so on. But anyway, you guys were on your run, and you broke through some bushes, and you came upon a temple. A temple that hadn't been there on any of your previous runs.
Oh,
and,
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't there on any of your previous runs. And when you all got there, your comlinks didn't work, because I remember one of you tried to report it. I think it was actually you, Morath, tried to.
Yes.
And that's when the first comlink got chewed apart, because you were angry because it wasn't working, so you just
Well, actually, eventually we did end up getting signal briefly, and when it cut out, I got mad.
That's not what happened, actually.
That was later on, yeah.
Yeah, that was later on. But
different comlink.
Yeah. So, there was no... yes, different comlink. There was no light in the temple, and, it had... I actually did have a mental map of it in my mind, and you guys went in for a little bit, and some of the party actually got scared as shit of the thing, and essentially just pieced out of there. And they got come back as soon as they got through the bushes, but when they returned to where they were, the temple wasn't there. The other fun part about this is the team that actually went ahead and started exploring into the temple, at the time, because I actually had everyone in the room, I actually used music cues and such to go ahead and make the mood go further and further. So what I did is I actually grabbed a piece of music from Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Say what you will about the movie, this particular bit of music was wonderful. It was, I believe, The Call of the Crystal Skull, or something like that was the piece. And it was just this creepy... Ba-da, ba-da. And I swear to you, this worked wonders, because everyone started getting so creeped out, and they were just creeping through this temple and going, oh my god, what is that, what is that, what is that? And this was actually, there was no threat at the time.
Yeah.
Nothing was happening. But they go ahead and they go through this hallway and they come into this central chamber where light is coming down. When you got in there, light suddenly shines down from up above. From what looked like vents of some sort, and illuminated the place. And by the time that you all had collected there, and when the music had gone through its third repetition on this particular piece, I then, and they're all just looking around and trying to figure out, okay, so how can I get there, or do something and figure things out. What I did was I just said, the lights go out. You scramble party dash out.
Yeah. Fucking lost it.
Yeah, everyone, and I keep in mind, I'm actually in the room with these people. This isn't, an over-the-internet roleplay, which we've done far too many of, and they kind of lose something. But I can see all their faces, and people had just gone white. Just like, oh shit! Boom! Just straight out of there, tripping and stumbling, and they're going, we need to run as fast as we can. I go, okay, make some run checks. People stumble, oh, grab him! Get them back on their feet, run on out, burst through the bushes that had gone ahead and hidden this place. And they actually ran out straight onto the landing pad of the main Jedi temple.
Yeah.
Which was not where the people who had left beforehand were.
Yeah. And we should also point out, I think it was about this point where Akul developed his to become iconic catchphrase of "God damn it, don't split the party."
Yes.
Actually, that occurred. It started to occur there. It didn't really become a quote until we made Planetside.
Yeah, but that was
I
the
think
first
that was
time
on
you really
Dathomir.
said it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was like the first time.
That was the first time that it was, the idea got planted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I have dubbed it the Temple of Togruta Headaches.
That's right. Because you kept on hitting your head on things. It had major echo issues, and Togruta had an enhanced sense of hearing because of the horns on their head, which were called Montrals, I believe.
Yes.
Poor Akul. Poor Akul.
Just the worst luck.
Yeah. So, they book it out of there. And with that, I actually sent them off on their first mission. Yeah, because they're just going on and on about these crazy things that are happening. But, actually, one important thing that happened previous to this is, because this was set up for the mission that actually happened, was, Washin's friend Jason, along with his sister Jaina, and the nephew of the Wookiee Lobaka, actually were kidnapped. They went up to a place called Gem Diver Station. Gem Diver Station that essentially mined Coruscant gems from the atmosphere of Yavin. Of course, Lando was the one running it because, young adult novel, and you bring back as many characters as you can. Right. Anyway, so they were kidnapped by the Shadow Academy, and Tenel Khan, Luke Skywalker, in canon, essentially flew off to go ahead and rescue them. And this is actually this book's plot was actually where I originally got the idea from the game. Because what Tenel Khan and Luke Skywalker do is they go to Dathomir, which, EU time. Dathomir is a planet that is famous for its Force-sensitive witches. And it's also where Rancors come from, that big old thing that Jabba had in his palace. It's where Rancors come from. And during the courtship of Princess Leia, all the action happens on Dathomir. And it becomes that, the the prince who has to choose who's going to essentially become the next queen mother of Hapes chooses a Dathomiri warrior lady who is a witch. And all females on Dathomir are force sensitive, but very, very few males are. Well, actually, not all females, but a disproportionate number of them are.
Yeah. Asajj Ventress was from Dathomir.
Yes, she was. But yeah, so it's like something like 50% of them are. It's a ridiculously high number. So it turns out that the reason why Luke and Tenelka went to Dathomir is because they got information from a friendly Dathomiri clan, which is where Tenelka's mother is from, that there's a new clan of Night Sisters. Which, when I say Night Sisters, that essentially means the Sith to these warrior witches of Dathomir. They are the Darksiders. And
was this before Sith was really like a big word that was used for like all the evil Jedi?
No, actually, one thing that should be brought up is that there is a distinct difference between Sith and Dark Jedi. Sith are their own specific culture, they have their own specific ways of looking at things. Dark Jedi just refers to someone who is a Jedi who fell to the dark side.
Yeah.
So you are not all. If you are a Darksider, you are not necessarily a Sith.
Yeah, the prequels and a lot of the games and stuff sort of muddy the issue because you're always fighting. You know, the bad guys are always the Sith. They're always the Dark Jedi who are the Sith. But in universe, apparently the Sith are just kind of like the one group of bad guys. It'd be like saying that Cold War communists, Nazis, Imperial Japanese, Confederate rebels during the Civil War, and like anyone else you could conceive as being the bad guys in a given conflict are all the Nazis.
That's actually not entirely true. The best way of thinking about it is the Sith is the dark side group that is fundamentally opposed to the Jedi.
All right.
They are the opposite of the Jedi. Whereas a Dark Jedi is just a Jedi who has fallen a little bit, or could potentially come back. A Sith actually has their own... They have... Where there is the Jedi Code, there is the Sith Code. Where there are Jedi holocrons, there are Sith holocrons. So on and so forth. The Sith are as much an organization as the Jedi are. Whereas a Dark Jedi is just a Dark Sider.
Yeah,
who was previously of the Jedi.
Yeah, they're just the comically bad guy-y version of the Jedi.
I suppose you could say that, yeah. There's actually an interesting thing that goes with the Jedi essentially being a bunch of religious fanatics and the Sith being humanists, if you look at their way of associating with the Force. But that's beside the point.
Yeah, you can look at that, but it, like almost all the media that like comes out for it is sort of like, the Sith are the guys who worship evil.
Yeah, it's actually one of the... but if you actually look at the underpinnings of the actual philosophies, it's kind of interesting because you've got your religious zealots and you've got your people who are essentially spouting humanist philosophy, but because of the fact in Star Wars that, yes, the religious zealots actually happen to be right. It is repeatable. You know, if you start doing stuff against the will of the Force, you go evil. It corrupts you. It's a place where, you know, the creationist actually finally has proof.
Fair way of putting it.
Well, it really does, you know, get into that. But, yeah, beside the point. So, what happens is, this new group of Night Sisters is kind of special because they have both female and male dark side Force sensitives. And what it actually ends up being is, it is a recruiting base for the Shadow Academy, which, once again, the Sith versus the Jedi. This is actually another illustration of it. The Shadow Academy is the big bad of the first arc of the Young Jedi Knight novels. Or the bad guys, I suppose you could say. They actually profess to be Dark Jedi, not Sith. They believe in the use of both dark and light side. So they're kind of espousing the gray Jedi side of things. Rather than just being, oh, we're totally evil, we're the Sith, dark side all the way.
And then they
there are
would
some
call
reasons
themselves
for that.
the Shadow Academy, basically tossing all that out the window.
Actually, the Shadow Academy name does come up, and the idea is that a combination of light and darkness is what creates shadows, and that's the reason they call themselves the Shadow Academy. What? That one's actually just straight from canon.
Fair enough. It's just like, I don't think the writers of the books were like, yes, no, because of all the nuance that the word Shadow Academy brings to mind.
Oh, no, the Shadow Academy were no doubt the bad guys, but it was the sympathetic enough bad guys that they could be lured away, getting into the whole idea of Force sensitives being lured to the dark side and being redeemed and such.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But anyway, so Luke and Tenel Kai go ahead and essentially get recruited for the Shadow Academy. I think it's the Great Valley Clan. That is essentially this new group, which is the Night Sisters, which is really just a resurgent Imperial base that is going ahead and recruiting Force sensitives because, oh boy, you've got a bunch of them on Dathomir. Luke and Tenel Kai, like I said, get recruited there. They go, save Jason, Jaina, and Lobaka, and then they go off. That recruiting base is still there. They never even mention it again. So that was the initial idea that made me say, okay, that needs to be fixed. So I'm going to have a bunch of PCs fix it. So that was the first mission. You were to go and try and shut down this recruiting base on Dathomir because, goddamn, that's a lot of Force sensitives. And even beyond just the Force sensitives, one of the things about Dathomiri culture is because the women are the Force sensitives, it is a highly matriarchal society. And that means that men essentially have no franchise in it. None whatsoever. They're essentially slaves. It's the classic sci-fi way of saying, oh, look how bad this is when the women are doing it to the men. Shouldn't it be the same way back? And, good points.
Yeah.
So what you have there is the Shadow Academy is essentially saying, even if you're not Force sensitive and you're a man and you can get away, we got a place for you in the Stormtrooper Corps. We got a place for you in our fighter pilots. Come and join us. Yeah, we're liberating you guys. Which was never really that heavily played up, shall we say, in the Young Jedi Knight books, but it was always kind of sort of subtext. Which was one of the reasons, again, why I thought that, this actually could make for a good place, because that also definitely comes up in the next two arcs of the Young Jedi Knight books that get much more into that sort of thing in the Shades of Grey. Which I never really appreciated when I initially read them, because way too young to. But when I came back to them, it was kind of interesting how these young adult novels in Star Wars really dealt a lot more in shades of gray than the standard Star Wars black and white. Anyway, so these guys were going to go off to take out this base on Dathomir, and Mara Jade was coming along to help them out. And what we have them do is we have them go up to an interesting little port of call in Star Wars called the Errant Venture.
A moving port of call.
Yes, a moving port of call. And that's actually very accurate. The Errant Venture was also originally from the X-Wing books. It's an Imperial Star Destroyer, I think it's an Imperial 2, that was salvaged in an earlier battle for Thifera during the Bacta Wars by Booster Tarek. Booster Tarek is Myrax Tarek's father. Myrax Tarek is Corran Horn's wife. As you can imagine, that he turned a Imperial Star Destroyer into a roving shadow port. This guy was one of the smugglers par excellence of the galaxy. Yeah. The other interesting thing about the Errant Venture is it's not white. It's red. The whole thing is painted red.
Yeah. It's a giant bright red Star Destroyer. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah. Oh, it gets better. It is severely undergunned because of the rules about what weapons it's supposed to have on it, because it's actually classified as a private yacht. But it's also gotten a lot more weapons on it. At one point in canon, it actually has a small version super laser on it. Finally,
sounds awesome.
Yeah, I know, right?
Is that the thing that the Death Star had on it?
Yes. It's a much smaller one than that, but yeah. Booster Tarek was cruising around in a red Star Destroyer with a mini Death Star gun in the front.
That's amazing. That's pretty amazing.
So anyway, you guys, or you guys, the two gentlemen with me, and the other gentlemen that were playing at the time, because at this point Tenma had dropped out, were sent to the Errant Venture to go ahead and take them part of the way towards Dathomir. After which, and on the Errant Venture, they were to go ahead and get a ship that they would then use to, jaunt around the galaxy in. And
yes.
Yeah. We were getting into some of our earlier bits of just crazy PC crap. Anyway, so Mara Jade essentially said, okay, I'm going to go talk with Booster Tarek because they're old friends, because Mara Jade at one point was another one of the big smugglers of the galaxy. You guys go ahead, find what you need, go ahead, load up on stuff that you might need, find us a ship, go ahead and get it, this is a test. Go. So, I'm going to toss this over to the other gentlemen, because they were the PCs for this.
Oh, God. Okay, so, I believe, Morath, you were the one who basically at this point decided, you know what, we don't have enough money to play with.
Yeah, this was the first time I tried to, which I didn't end up doing, by the way. I was looking at...
Yes, you did!
Yeah, you did. You bought a lot of stuff. I remember some of your shopping list.
Well, yes, but I'm talking specifically about the ship. I didn't end up doing it with. But the ship was one of the first things we got our hands on.
Well, it was the big thing that you needed to get.
Yeah, there were some other things along the side.
Yeah.
The big thing we were picking up was this ship.
Yeah, I remember using Daddy's bank account, quote unquote, for the stuff that wasn't the ship.
Yeah, you bought a advanced protocol droid, and you got the
never
laser.
got to use.
You have the laser rapier.
The light foil, yes.
Yeah, which is essentially a rapier made out of plasma.
It's a less good lightsaber.
Yeah,
that's really what it is.
But yeah, so you got yourself a robot, and I decided, no, you can't.
It was actually an astromech that he got.
Right.
Not an asteroid.
Yeah, which didn't even come into play until way later.
Right, he got what is basically R2-D2.
Yeah.
And I decided, screw you. I'm gonna get my own robot with my no money. And I picked up a little
blackjack and hookers.
Yeah. So I got the little box mouse thing, the stupid.
Oh right. I forgot about that thing. Yeah, you got your hands on a mouse droid.
But after buying a bunch of crap, basically, and having a giant, big day competition about who could buy the most useless crap, we decided, let's get a ship.
Yeah, because that was the point of what you were doing there. Just as a little point
we got
there.
Some armor as well. Everyone kind of armored up at this point, because at this point, everyone had guns and very, very basic equipment. But this was our opportunity.
Yeah, everyone had a blaster pistol. Everyone had a melee weapon of some sort.
Yeah, so I know that.
But you guys only really got your hands on very light armor.
Yeah, we got armor. I remember we got a breastplate, which ends up being important a little bit later on. But we armored up. We loaded up on crap that we hoped would be useful, and then we decided, let's get a ship.
Yeah.
And that's where things went downhill.
Yeah.
You say downhill, I say uphill.
We ended up going into this place where there were some very nice ships, one of which I was thinking of buying, and this was where I was going to use Daddy's bank account, but then decided, no.
Yeah, wasn't that ship that you were thinking of buying with Daddy's bank account essentially what Lando Calrissian tools about the galaxy in?
Yeah, not heavily armed enough is what I came to the conclusion of.
You were also told by Fraug that you were not allowed to use Daddy's bank account to buy a high-end ship.
Well,
because he was just sort of no, you guys don't get a super starship right now.
Oh, there's also the fact that that would be pretty useless to you guys.
Yeah. The thing was, there was a lot of things. I mean, it's essentially a yacht, but it was essentially... It would make for an interesting command ship a little bit, but not really. You
guys were going to be getting into way too many space shootouts for that to be a good idea.
I love the fact that we're going oh yeah, but I mean it wouldn't have enough guns on it. considering what we bought.
Yes.
HWK actually had a pretty good armament.
It
Yeah.
had like a gun, but anyway, we'll get to that.
That's not true, actually, dude.
It had a decommissioned proton bomb launcher.
Yes.
Yeah, which we took off, which we like scrapped.
Well, it was illegal. It was decommissioned, but it was still there. I tried to get it recommissioned, but Luke Skywalker said that it was too much power for a bunch of 15-year-olds to have.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Or his wife, I think, was his other comment.
Anyway, at any point, what we ended up doing was looking in the back channels
Yeah.
and the used car lots of the marketplace. And do you want to explain what we ended up getting and who we got it from, Morath? Because you haven't talked a lot here, and I think this is a place that you probably could elaborate.
So, just among Leku having society, by which I mean Togruta and Twi'lek, there's this thing where if you get tattoos on them, it's considered badass.
Yeah, because you're essentially going ahead and tattooing part of your brain, at least in the Twi'lek.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, also an erogenous zone, just for funsies.
oh,
Yeah.
Jesus. At any rate,
So I go up and I see a guy with these head tails that are tattooed from base to tip, and I think, that's the guy I want to buy a ship from. I'm not sure why.
because I see
it was
Hell's
probably
Angels
very
and be like, yeah, he's who I want to buy my new car from.
Yeah. Because I was looking at the other ship, and I was like, this thing doesn't have heavy armament enough. I think if anybody, I'm thinking somewhat along, I think it's the Hell's Angels or the Killer Angels or something like that, from the biker gang. And I look at this guy, and think, this guy's got to have some guns on his ship.
Yeah, didn't you actually go ahead and ask me if there was anyone that looked particularly shady or some such like that?
Yes, I did, and this is what I came up with.
Oh,
I think it was flown by a Chiss, though.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which we ended up getting a losing price on, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, it was a win for both sides because they wanted to get rid of what was considered a dirty ship, and we wanted a new ship.
Yeah.
So we picked up, and do you remember what the ship was called, Morath?
Swamp Rat, initially.
Not
The
quite.
Slash Rat.
The Slash Rat, oh yes.
There you go.
For the record, that was actually something I tortured my PCs with in the first game, too.
Yeah, so we were flying around in a giant metal box with a gun strapped to it.
A couple of guns,
Actually,
actually.
Slash Rat.
Yeah.
Quick point of order. What you actually got was a pretty good ship. It was a HWK 290. That's essentially what Kyle Katarn was originally tooling around the galaxy in. It
That's fair,
was something that could actually be customized and such. Unfortunately, it had been customized by a bunch of pirates. They had ripped most of the good stuff out of it, and they had left it an utter mess.
Yeah.
They ripped some of the good stuff out of it and made it a slave transport.
Yeah.
A slave transport with a very particular piece of very useful data that we actually didn't See, this is where the ship really comes in to be really interesting. I'll let Morath tell the story because he ends up being super important to where that story ends up going.
So,
First, let me just explain. We picked up the ship, and like the ship itself wasn't too bad, but Morath decided he was going to try and just hack the computer to try and get like information from it, because information's always useful. But as it turns out, he botched that roll horribly. And then
I did really well on the roll. And what you're talking about is I did really well on the roll, but I rolled a botch on the botch die.
Right.
It's called the complication, guys.
Right, complication. So you had a complication on a success. So, and this ended up leading to probably the longest running joke in the entire game.
Yes.
So I'll let you explain it more, because you have so much to do with why it ended up becoming like full-on memetic.
Alright, so I ended up successfully hacking the ship's data core.
Mm-hmm.
The complication was that I released one of the crewmates on the ship before we ended up giving that section of the racks to Maine was a Gamorrean.
Who are
the big
Actually, you don't know that he was Gamorrean.
No, we don't know for certain.
Yeah, no,
All
we saw him.
No, that was the thing. We just
No,
saw
you never
his,
saw him.
What he left behind. But
the third bunk was the one that it was. It looked like a Gamorrean had been sleeping in there. There was awfully good evidence that a Gamorrean had been sleeping in there, but he never actually saw a Gamorrean.
yeah,
Okay.
Point is, for people who don't know, they are the giant pigmen, the big green pigmen.
Yeah, from Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, he ends up. So I end up accidentally releasing a self-copying pornography virus from the maybe Gamorrean's computer.
We say maybe because
It was Gamorrean porn.
it was a very particular type of porn.
It was Gamorrean
We call this
meat spin.
Gamorrean meat spin.
Which apparently had a track from the 1980s in human culture, playing over it.
Yeah, for the record, guys, when I pulled this on them, I went ahead and trolled them by starting to sing "You Spin Me Right Round, Baby, Right Round." But when I got to a certain point, I actually went ahead and did a pig grunt there instead. The entire room died.
Oh God!
But
So, you know,
It gets better than
Genius
this,
here.
by the way.
yeah, genius here. Morath decides, you know what this thing really needs? What I really need to do with this self-copying virus? Put it on my personal computer.
I put it on my data slate, on my spare data slate. Unfortunately, that also meant that it had wireless transmit capability,
Yes, it did.
which meant that it went everywhere.
Oh, by the way, it didn't end here, because Maine actually got in on the programming, too. I don't know if you remember, but he's the dude who tried to go ahead and program the flight simulator.
Yeah, and we both helped each other, which my datapad's the reason that it had the virus embedded in it.
Yeah. So
Unfortunately, Maine was completely incompetent at going ahead and putting together their flight simulator, so he essentially had asteroids that whenever you broke the high score, Gamorrean meat spin.
yeah. And keep in mind that this is, again, every time this video is played, every open computer attached to the wireless internet anywhere, in the same area, gets this virus.
Yes.
So,
We're spreading the plague.
yes, you were.
it's one of Akul's great accomplishments, and that will be explained later.
Yeah, because it didn't end there, believe it or not.
Yeah.
We'll get to that as it comes.
So, Maine and Akul go ahead and say to Washington, who has not been exposed to this yet, hey dude, we've got a flight simulator set up. You should probably, practice on this. And he goes, this is fucking asteroids. Just play it, man. Just play it.
Actually, no, we
Gamorrean
didn't.
meat spin.
Actually, no, it was, that was what happened when we went back to the
Oh
academy.
no, you did that later. But the first person you tried that on was Washington.
Yeah.
Well, no, because we didn't actually know until Lobaka found out that the asteroids.
Yeah, 'cause he was the only
Oh,
one that
that's
actually
right.
beat it.
Right. 'Cause funny thing about this Wookiee Jedi is Lobaka is a computer nerd. In canon.
Yeah.
When they go to his house, they play video games.
He is the John Carmack of giant teddy bear people.
Of walking carpets.
Yeah.
At any rate.
So yeah, they had a virus-infected ship, but they did have a ship. And it did have some potential for them to build it up over time.
Yeah, we had a ship, we had a virus, which would eventually become semi-sentient. We had a couple of droids that would end up being almost totally useless until much later on.
Yes.
And some armor, which we didn't realize how incredibly useful it would end up being.
Except for Akul. That was one thing. Akul never got armor.
That's right.
I ended up getting armor this trip actually but Caskel ended up making it for me.
No, you never actually got that armor, dude.
Yeah, you ordered
Really?
it, you didn't get it.
Yeah, you gave Caskel the idea, but he never actually got to that. I actually remember this, because this goes into the 3-month break. So Caskel was going to help you out with some stuff that you'd done with it. But that's not entirely true. You did acquire armor on this trip, but we'll get to that later.
Oh, yes. Oh, right.
But yeah, no,
That
you
one.
essentially spent the money that I was essentially letting you guys spend on the light foil instead of armor, and you went, I'll be fine.
That thing was so useful for so many occasions.
You know,
Actually,
it actually
was.
did come out being useful a number of different times.
I remember it being like in every major scene of the campaign until we actually got lightsabers, which was a really long time down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, it was.
The thing was unreliable as hell, but it was there.
Which is actually the point of a light foil in the rules, that whenever you roll a complication on it, it fizzles.
Yeah.
It takes an
Anyway.
hour of time to fix it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, we're actually about the end of our time aboard the
Air
first.
adventure.
Yeah, the first, not really the first arc, but the first half of the first arc. And since we've been going for about 2 hours, we'll probably stop here and then next time talk about the first planet.
Yep, Dathomir.
Alright.
And the introduction of the last character who is super important to the story.
And we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, I know. So, till next time, this is... you know what? Fuck it. This is RollDX.
Yeah, damn straight.
Yeah.
This is actually a RollDX thing.
This is entirely what RollDX was supposed to be. So, fuck it. It's RollDX now. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
And recording...